Hello and welcome to Mr. C History. Now it is June, Pride Month of course, and so I'm going to go on a journey around London and the UK to discover some interesting places to do with LGBTQ plus history. We'll look at various different things, and in fact I'm actually starting here in Highbury Fields because on the evening of 25th of November 1970 the first gay protest march took place here. Indeed, it started under candlelight as a sort of vigil and then progressed further and further. And they were protesting against police brutality, specifically against the arrest of a man called Louis Eakes. He had been here, and I think he just came to meet a friend and was beaten up and arrested by the police. Now, homosexuality had been decriminalised, of course, in 1967, but by 1970, mentality hadn't quite changed, and certainly by the police, and there was a lot of the gay community here in London did face a lot of police aggravation and also from the public. So the GLF, the Gay Liberation Front, organised a vigil here, a protest came about, and indeed there's a building over there, I think, that's got a little tiny plaque. That's really it. There should perhaps be a bigger memorial to that. This was the site of the first protest march, and homosexual rights and LGBTQ plus rights have increased more and more since that date, and there have been, of course, more marches. This is the very famous bookshop Gay's the Word, which is a very historical place in itself. It's one of the first gay bookshops in London, but actually I've come here specifically because of its association with the LGSM, Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners. This was during the 1984-85 miners' strike. Margaret Thatcher's government had frozen the funds of many of the miners' groups, so they needed to raise money from various other different support groups. And one such support group was based here, the LGSM. Now they raised a lot of money, about 80 odd thousand pounds of today's money, to pay and help support the miners, specifically in South Wales, and they went there and visited them, and it became a common cause. The miners definitely returned the favour. The many miners went on the very first Pride marches in the 1980s. They were there with their miners' flags as well. And indeed, at the 1985 Labour Party conference in Bournemouth, there was a resolution passed by the Labour Party to support LGBT rights, and that was pushed through by the miners, who had such a big hold and that they were a big voting bloc, so they definitely reciprocated. But the first meetings of the LGSM started here, and this is where the whole process came about. And indeed they made a film about it in 2014 called Pride, and it's based on the story that started here. This is the magnificent St George's Hall in Liverpool, and in 2006 there was a Thanksgiving ceremony, an unveiling and a celebration of the life of April Ashley, who was an extraordinarily significant person in the history of transgender rights here in Britain. She was one of the first people, certainly publicly well-known people, to have gender reassignment surgery. It was 1961 in Morocco when she did this, and indeed she was outed as a transgender person by the Sunday Telegraph, I think, within that. So she then became a model. She had relations with significant people of the day, and she was a fervent campaigner for transgender rights. This is Hadrian's Wall, just along the ridge line there in Northumberland, looking at Scotland, which Hadrian built this wall to keep the Picts, the Scots, out, and further that way to the rest of the Roman Empire. Now Hadrian was, many people believe, in a homosexual relationship. Now this is not unusual for Roman men. They did. Bisexuality was very, very common, and they were often in relationships that we would consider homosexual. And indeed it is often a bit now, isn't it? People say, oh, so this historical figure must have been gay, and sometimes that often goes down into stereotypes or in circumstantial. But there's a very interesting story with Hadrian, and that is he fell in love with a young man called Antinous, who was about 18, 19, and now this really was a very public love. Yes, they had homosexual relationship in Roman times, but those relationships tended to not be so public. Hadrian's absolutely was, and Antinous often followed him around at all of his amazing tours of the Roman Empire. Hadrian went up to Britain, he went to Egypt. He was one of those really amazing, well-travelled emperors, and indeed on one of those trips to Egypt, Antinous unfortunately died. He drowned in the River Nile, and Hadrian was totally crestfallen. And crucially, as I said, he mourned him publicly, which was not a thing. That is only something you would do to someone you truly loved. And he built a city named after him. He worshipped. They built statues of him. He even made him a god. He deified him. That was the thing, and it was publicly. The rest of the empire had to mourn him. So an extraordinary figure. And Hadrian, he's a titan of the Roman Empire, across this vast lands of the empire, brought down by love for a young man. I'm at the end of platform 10 of Clapham Junction Station, and on the 20th of November 1895, Oscar Wilde was here on this platform. He spent half an hour here when he was being transferred from Wandsworth Prison to Reading Jail. And in that half hour, he received horrendous homophobic abuse, people shouting, spitting at him, and calling him all sorts of things. Why and who was he, I suppose we should answer. Well, this was at the height of his fame, so he was very famous. So he was recognised on the platform here. Why was he so famous? Well, Oscar Wilde was a very famous literary figure of the late Victorian period. The Picture of Dorian Gray novel, Ideal Husband play, the importance of being earnest. Indeed, they were in the theatres at the time in 1895. So he was very famous. And he had just gone through the trial of the century, one of the first believed celebrity trials. Now, why was he on trial? Well, he was in a relationship with a young man called Lord Alfred Douglas, and his father was a man called the Marquis of Queensberry, and Marquis of Queensberry found out about this relationship and was not happy and publicly accused Oscar Wilde of being homosexual. Oscar Wilde then sued the Marquis of Queensberry for libel, saying this is not true. And unfortunately for Oscar, there was evidence that came about that did show that he was homosexual. So this, initially, Wilde was suing Queensberry, then turned on to Wilde himself, and he was put on trial for homosexuality, which was a crime at the time, or indecency, I think was the thing eventually they came through. And he was found guilty and sentenced to hard labour. Initially, he went to various prisons in London. It was arranged to say that he could come to Reading Jail, and that is why he was here at Clapham Junction. But clearly the half hour that was here had a real profound impact on him, and he wrote about it. And at the same time, 2 to 2:30 every day in Reading Jail, Oscar Wilde would cry, would weep, because of the experience he had had here. It was so very significant. And sadly, he was released in 1897 and he died in 1900 in Paris. He was a broken man by prison, broken man by these experiences. But in 2017, Oscar Wilde, along with 50,000 other homosexual men, were all pardoned of their crimes. And in 2019, the rainbow plaque was put here on platform 10. And of course, Oscar Wilde is extremely famous now. Who knows who the Marquis of Queensberry is, really? So who wins in the end? I think it's Oscar. Well, actually, I've just missed my train home, but I am going to go home from here now. Thank you ever so much for watching. It's a very noisy Clapham Junction here. Time to end. I hope you've enjoyed that as much as I am. Please don't forget to subscribe, and happy Pride Month.